Five years ago, about roughly 5 years ago, was a tricky time in my life because I got selected to serve on a jury. Anybody served on a jury before? Like, not just gone, but you got picked and you had to like sit there and all that stuff. Yeah, it's an interesting learning experience, right? And so 5 years ago, like I said, is this grueling process. Like, part of what made it so tricky was we were still coming out of kind of all the pandemic stuff. So this was like January, February of 2021. And so we're still social distancing in the courthouse. We're still all wearing masks. And it's like, could you take your mask off while you're, testifying here so we can actually hear what's going on? Like, it was just all these complications. The courts had to obviously move forward, but they didn't have a great system for how to navigate all that stuff. So it was really tricky. And then it turned out that the trial that I got selected on was a murder trial that went on for like 2 months. And so it was just this whole thing that I was exhausted every single time. And this trial, this murder trial, like, I'm not going to get into all the details, but this family was a wreck, right? This family was a wreck, that it was like one person from the family was on trial, accused of murder, and so everybody's like pointing fingers at everybody else, and like everybody kind of had some sort of motive, we thought, right? And so we're like trying to figure out, like the classic detective, like, who done it? Who is the culprit here? Like, is this guy guilty or not guilty? And so as absurd as this whole process was, and like trying as a process it was, one thing that I could count on was that there was going to be some order and some process that took place, because the United States has a very good judicial system like that, right? And so I knew who was on trial. I knew who was being accused. I knew what the charge was. And I say all that, and we're like, well, yeah, that's a given. Like, everybody should know that stuff. But it made me like appreciate just that judicial process that we have in our country, because there's countries throughout history, there's countries still in the world today that they don't have that same kind of law and order. Right? It doesn't follow always that same sort of process. It's not always a fair trial. We can have this confidence that there's going to be a fair trial here in the United States. So that's something that we take for granted. But other countries, other societies, sometimes it's just like much more haphazard, much more like, what is going on here? And really, I want kind of that picture in your mind as we get into Jesus' sixth sign today, because in some sense, it's kind of this trial scene, right? It's not like a courthouse like we would think of it today, but it's certainly people on trial. So we're going to look in John chapter 9. If you do have your Bible, I'd love for you to meet me there, John chapter 9. So we're almost done with this sign series. There's 7 signs in the Gospel of John. We're on number 6, so we're going to wrap it up next week and then kind of take a couple weeks preparing for Easter Sunday. But in John chapter 9, what happens is Jesus is going to heal this blind man. I know, spoiler alert, right? Spoiler alert. He's going to heal this blind man. But then after the miracle takes place, like has been the case for most of the signs, there's all this conversation and all this kind of frustration and curiosity of like, what's going on and what does this mean and how does this impact us? And so much more text is written about what happened after the miracle itself than just Jesus actually healing this blind man. And it's very much like this impromptu trial that just breaks out, right? And so there's going to be kind of several questions I ask to kind of keep us focused and moving through the different sections of the text. But let me just catch us up to speed a little bit, because we skipped a couple chapters from the last 2 signs that we've seen in John 6 to here we are in chapter 9. But to fill us in a little bit, like, confusion about who Jesus is has only been increasing. And opposition against Jesus and what he's doing has only been increasing. So in chapter 6, if you remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about how many disciples left Jesus because he said, hey, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood if you want to be my followers. And so they're like, that's weird. They left Jesus. Chapter 7, then there's lots of debate about who is this guy. There's lots of division amongst the Jews in chapter 7 and chapter 8. The Jewish leaders are so upset with Jesus because he said, hey, before Abraham was, I am. And they knew what that meant. They knew that he was making this claim that he himself was the I am. He himself was Yahweh. He was God in the flesh. And so they are ready to stone Jesus, right? Like picking up rocks, that kind of stoning, picking up rocks and throwing them at Jesus. They're ready to kill him by stoning him. So that's how chapter 8 ends. And then we're picking it up here in chapter 9 as Jesus kind of like sneaks out of that area. It's kind of amazing to me sometimes. You're reading the Gospels and it's like there's riots breaking out, and then it's like, and Jesus slipped through the crowd. And you're like, how did he go invisible? Like, how did he do this? Like, he was the center of attention, and all of a sudden he's just like out, right? Because his hour had not yet come. So we're picking it up here in chapter 9. Let me read some of those opening verses. It says this: as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And so he went and washed and came back seeing. So there's another amazing miracle, right? That Jesus gives sight to this man who has never once seen in his entire life. We're told that he was born blind. But did you notice the first question that the disciples asked when they encountered this blind man? They asked, who sinned? Who sinned? See, the disciples, along with kind of the general population of the Jews in that day, they held to this belief that somebody's physical disabilities were the direct punishment for their spiritual disobedience, right? So somebody had some sort of sickness, ailment, disability because they were sinful, or somebody in their family was sinful, and so they were being judged or cursed by God for that sin, and so they have this hardship in their life. You can just imagine like how painful, how damaging, how shaming that would be on anybody. You think of this guy, like when Jesus is like, no, he didn't sin, his parents didn't sin. It's not the case. Like if they knew that, but just all the criticism and shame and judgment that they're going to get. But apparently, like the disciples missed the lesson in synagogue about the book of Job, right? Like, which kind of like debunks that whole idea that, oh, you must have sinned. That's why you're having all this hardship in your life. They must have missed Job. I don't know what synagogue looked like back then. But Jesus clearly wants to be like absolute about this. He wants to be clear about this. So like we read in verse 3, that's there on the screen as well. So there's not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. I always love that verse, that the works of God might be displayed in him. He makes it abundantly clear by saying this, that the man's blindness was actually specifically designed by God. Right? God didn't make a mistake when he created this man. And this encounter that they're now having, this encounter was specifically arranged by God for that man to be at that place at that time so that Jesus would see him and come and interact with him to reveal something about Jesus. So there was no mistakes in this process. There's no mistakes in this man's life or this disability. Maybe that's just something you need to cling to this morning. If you've struggled with hardship, with disability, with tragic things happening in your life, like those aren't mistakes, but those are actually these opportunities for people to see Jesus through your life, right? Like I love how Jesus clears that up here. And so people thought, again, this man's blindness was this physical problem caused by actually a spiritual problem. The question, who sinned? Who sinned here? But Jesus actually takes it even a step further, not just to say, no, this wasn't a sin issue, but he shows it with his actions. He could have just said, like, be healed or be forgiven or anything like that, and his blindness would have gone away. His sight could have been restored. He does something actually kind of weird again, right? Like kind of odd, kind of strange, that he spits in the dirt, right? He gets down, he like picks up some of this dirt, makes a little like muddy saliva paste, and he puts it on this man's eyes. And then tells him to go wash in the pool, and he does, and he's healed. Why would Jesus do all that, right? That's actually something like I've questioned repeatedly as I've studied this chapter before. I'm like, why does he do all that stuff? Why does he make this mud? But I think what kind of became more clear as I'm going through it this week is he uses a physical remedy for a physical problem, right? He's not just saying, no, nobody sinned. He's showing that with his actions. Like, hey, this is a physical problem that the man has. I'm going to use something physical just to prove again there's no sin involved. There's not this spiritual disobedience involved. And so he just goes to great length to kind of restore this man. But this is where this miracle story kind of gets propelled onto a whole new level, right? Because it's obviously it starts with this man's blindness, and sin is brought into the conversation. And so sin and blindness, and how do they go together? And essentially what's going to happen the whole rest of this chapter is Jesus uses this man as like a living parable for more to teach, right? A greater blindness that people have that is a sin issue. This is not a sin issue. He showed that with putting some spitty mud on his eyes and healing him. And so we see that Jesus didn't just come to heal people's physical needs, but really Jesus came to rescue us from spiritual blindness, right? The physical is pointing to something so much greater. It's pointing to the spiritual and why Jesus came. And then this too is where we get launched into this like courtroom style trial, impromptu trial that breaks out with the people and with the Jewish leaders that come. And so it can be really confusing, like through this process, like what's going on? And so the question for us to kind of think about this is, who's on trial through this process? Who actually is on trial? So let me read some of these verses to keep us going, and then I'm going to summarize a bit too. It's a long chapter. But let me start reading, pick it up in verse 8. It says, the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? And some said, it is he. Others said, no, but it's like him. And he kept saying, I am the man. And so they said to him, then how were your eyes opened? And he answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. And so I went and washed and received my sight. And they said to him, where is he? And he said, I don't know. I couldn't see at the time. And so I couldn't see that word. No, that's my snarky response that I would have said. They said, where is he? And he said, I do not know. Probably because I couldn't see, right? Because I couldn't see. So if we kind of pause there, so there's these neighbors of him, like people that knew who this blind man was. They knew that's where he sits, that's his corner, that's where he's going to beg every day. He's blind, he's always been that way. They're confused about what's going on. They're confused about who he really is. They're curious. And so they're the first ones who question this man who is formerly blind, that they're struggling to even reconcile that this is the same guy. Right? Like, you trying to like read between the lines, like you could imagine this guy's frustration. He's like, no, I'm the guy. Like, it's me. I don't have a doppelganger. Like, this is me. I'm the same person. And so they didn't know what to do about this. They're like, how is this possible? This is crazy. Like, nobody's sight has ever been restored like this who was born blind. And so then they don't know what to do, so they bring him to the Pharisees, the religious leaders. But they also kind of part of their function of the Pharisees was like the official religious court of their day. So they're the ones who got to decide. They're the ones who got to judge what to do. What's right, what's wrong, what steps to take. And so to kind of summarize some of these next verses 14 through 17, it's where the Pharisees, they bring the man before them. They question the man as to what happened, as if he's the same guy, right? They're trying to figure it out. In that process, they start accusing Jesus because he did this on the Sabbath. So apparently spitting on the dirt and making some mud, too much work for the Sabbath in their minds. They start calling Jesus a sinner. Remember, this whole thing started, who sinned? They start calling Jesus a sinner for breaking the Sabbath. But when they can't get to the bottom of it themselves with this man, then they're like, we got to call his parents in, right? So then they call their parents to kind of come and testify on trial. And so verses 18 through 23, they're questioning the parents, like, is this really your son, right? And the parents are like, yeah, this is him. Like, we don't know how he's healed. We don't know what happened. He's a big boy, right? He's an adult. Like, you can go ask him for himself. We don't have to answer. They didn't want to get in trouble with the Jewish court, so they just kind of like back out. Thank you, mom and dad, for the support, right? So they back out, and then it comes back to the man again. It's like the second go around. So let me read a little bit more here, verse 24. It says, so for the second time, they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. Basically, they're trying to strong arm him, right? They're trying to say like, hey, you really want to do the right thing? You really want to glorify God? Just tell us what we want to hear. Verse 25, he answered, Whether he's a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." And they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered them, "I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses." And it goes on where they argue a little bit more, and eventually they kick the man out of that whole temple area, kind of banish him from coming there anymore. So throughout this whole section, there's all these accusations that are taking place against the man and his parents and about Jesus. And that's the question, like, who's on trial here? Who's on trial? Is it the man? Is it his parents? Or is it actually Jesus that they're trying to bring onto trial? And so through all of this formerly blind man, kind of as we read it from the readers today, this man who was once blind, we realize he's the one who actually sees the situation most clearly, isn't he? He's the one who actually sees the truth. He's the one who actually understands who Jesus actually is. So he didn't have all the answers, right? He didn't have it all figured out, like he's brand new at this, but he did see Jesus, and he stands firmly on that transformation that had taken place in his life. Right? It's like where we get some of the most famous lines from any Christian song, Amazing Grace, when it says, "I once was blind, but now I see." Right? It's just plucked straight from this story. And so this whole process of who's on trial. But then there's one more section here, and then we'll kind of come back and go through all of it. There's one more section with one more question that we got to ask of who's the judge in this? Who's the judge? Because throughout this little trial, the Pharisees think they're the ones sitting in the judgment seat, right? They think they're the ones who can say who's right, who's wrong, is Jesus a sinner or is he not, where's he actually from? They're the ones who actually cast the man out of the temple when they don't like his answers, and he does start being a little sassy with them, saying, "Oh, you want to be his disciples too? I'll show you where he is." But then Jesus has this second encounter. If you jump down to verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." And some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" And Jesus said to him, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, 'We see,' your guilt remains." So while he approaches this man the second time, has this follow-up conversation with him, Jesus brings up one of his favorite titles of himself. One of his favorite titles of himself is the Son of Man. The Son of Man. And Jesus uses it all throughout the Gospels because not only is it a way that he can point to his humanity, he's like, "Oh, I'm just the son of a man," right? A son of man. But it also has this strong kind of callback to the Old Testament book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7, there's this vision that Daniel has where the Son of Man comes down with the full authority of God, and he comes down to judge all the prideful leaders of the world. And so there's times that Jesus used this, and sometimes he's referring to his humanity, and other times he's really calling back and referring to his power and his authority and his judgment over these other leaders. And so verse 39, and this whole story, verse 39 is so key for us to understand the actual sign that's taking place here. Because not only did Jesus come to rescue people from this, from spiritual blindness, but part of that involves in his coming, he's going to judge those who reject him. He's going to judge those who refuse to see him. And so there's this sobering reality that those who don't see Jesus, they end up on the side of his judgment instead of his salvation. Right? They're the ones then that are on trial, and Jesus is the one who's actually the judge. And so verse 39 is where this whole blind and seeing analogy becomes so much clearer for us. And so to kind of compare just blindness and seeing, that on that spiritual level, we could say it like this, that to be spiritually blind means to be prideful and to minimize your sin and ultimately to ignore Jesus. right? To ignore his authority, to ignore his salvation, that is to actually be blind, spiritually speaking. On the flip side of that, you can see that to be spiritually seeing means that we are humble before Jesus. We humble ourselves. We admit our own sin. We admit the needs that we have in our lives. And it's actually this humility to then obey Jesus. If we see him, we don't just say, hey, there's Jesus, but we obey Jesus. We respond to him and follow him as he leads us. And so the leaders in the story, these religious leaders who thought that they had the authority to judge, they were actually the ones who were guilty of sin. They were actually the ones who were blind to what God was really doing in their lives and in the world. And so but on the flip side, the ones who know that they're blind, right, like this man, are the ones who actually can see his light. He said, I'm the light who's come into the world. They see his light. They see the truth of Jesus. So that's just kind of trying to get all of our bearings on the story, because there's all these different sections, and there's a lot going on, a lot of dialogue. But if we're to take a step back and try to look at this whole story kind of at large, each one of these signs that we've been looking at so far in John's gospel, each one of the signs have started with a miracle, pointed to something greater about Jesus, and each one has shown us not only who Jesus is, but it's shown us something about ourselves, something about how we can respond to that. But this sign kind of takes it a little bit further than even the other signs have, because this time, Jesus is drawing a very clear line. It's not just saying, hey, here's who I am, come and follow me, love me. He's drawing that line that there is judgment, that there will be this day, that there's consequences that are going to be played out. And so Jesus emphasizing his judgment or the consequences that we face if we refuse to see him is much different than anything else that we've seen in the other signs throughout the Gospel of John. And so just like in a courtroom today, right? Think of a modern courtroom, modern setting today. When somebody is found guilty, it's then the judge who's going to hand out the punishment or the judgment for their sins, for their guilty offense. That's the same thing of what Jesus is doing here. And the Pharisees get it. They're offended by it, right? Are you calling us blind? And he's like, yeah, I am, because you guys don't see who I am. You don't see what God is doing. And so he's drawing this line. He's saying, again, in verse 39, for judgment I came into this world. That's part of why Jesus came. Yes, he came to save, but that means that all those who won't accept his salvation, they will face judgment. Now, this might be this sobering wake-up call that some of us need even today in our own lives, that there are consequences for the way that we live our lives. There are consequences now, and there's definitely consequences for all of eternity. That if we think that we can just kind of admire Jesus from afar, if we think that we can just support him and be like, oh yeah, Jesus is a good guy, but never really side with him, he's saying, look, if you don't come and see me and follow me, you're on the side of judgment. And so there's very much this wake-up call for us. But it should give us this opportunity and this choice that we have to say, will I see Jesus? Will I respond to him in the right way? Will I draw closer to him? Now, if that sounds like, whoa, that's very definitive, and Jesus is drawing this harsh line, again, I want us to take in this whole story at large and not miss what we have seen. Get this, Jesus comes to us, and then he calls us to look to him. He's the one who comes to us first. Maybe you notice that in the story. Even at the very beginning, that he has two encounters with this blind man. Both of them, Jesus takes the initiative, right? First, Jesus comes to the blind man at the beginning. He didn't see Jesus. He couldn't see Jesus. He was blind. And then later on in the story, the blind man wasn't seeking Jesus out, right? He had been pushed out, he'd been kicked out by the religious leaders. Jesus sought him out. Jesus found him when he had nowhere else to go. It's always Jesus' initiative. We can't miss that. In our own lives today, the same is true. It's always Jesus' initiative in coming to his people. Because of his heart of compassion, because of his heart of mercy, he sees this man's needs. He knows the struggles that he's been through. He knows how this disability has impacted him. He sees us before we're even aware of who Jesus is. he moves closer to us, not us pursuing him because, oh, we want to be a better person and we want to come to Jesus. No, he comes to us first, right? And he takes that initiative to invite us out of darkness and into his light. Just like we see throughout this story with this man born blind, it's Jesus who takes initiative in our lives. And so, yeah, he does draw this line of judgment, but he gives us this opportunity first. He gives us this chance to pursue us and initiate relationship and come to us. And so Jesus never demands something from us from a distance, right? He never stands back to clean up your life and then we can talk about having a relationship first. He doesn't do that. He always moves close to us. He reveals our sin and he's like, hey, come with me. Come into the light with me. He makes that first move every single time in every one of our lives. And then he calls us to respond to him, to look to him, to see him, to see his light, to recognize our sin, to recognize the areas that we keep falling short, to recognize just how great of a need we have, to humble ourselves before his authority, to obey his instruction, whatever he decides to tell us to do. That's that invitation to look to him. And really, this whole kind of call and response that Jesus has with us, this, I really believe this is a regular rhythm of our relationship with Jesus. I know sometimes we might see that as initially experiencing salvation. If you're here, you've put your faith in Jesus, you're like, oh yeah, well, he's the one who found me. He's the one who called me out. He's the one, and then I responded to him. But that doesn't just start at the very beginning of our relationship. It's not just when we come out of darkness into light, but throughout the growth of our relationship with Jesus, he continues to take the initiative, moving closer to us and calling us to something more. To have us just continue to see him over and over. This is a regular rhythm of our relationship with Jesus. So even if you've been following Jesus, had a faith of your own for years or for decades, he's still calling you closer, right? It's never just, oh, well, I'm a Christian now, so I'm good. No, he wants more of you. He wants you to see him more clearly and just keep growing in that relationship with him. And he's the one who initiates it. He's the one who moves closer to us first. And so I hope, even as I was trying to take this in this last week, I hope as you hear this, this should be relieving for us. This should be so relieving for us. Because if you're anything like me, there's sometimes that the Christian life, we think, I've just got to try harder. I got to get a little more disciplined. I got to prove to Jesus that I do love him. I got to prove to him that I am worthy of the sacrifice that he made for me. And so we put all of this on ourselves, but that's not what the relationship is about. It's not up to your power. It's not up to my own power to just fumble our way closer to Jesus. It's recognizing that he'll meet us right where we're at. He comes to us first, and then he gives us this opportunity to come to him. He gives us this opportunity to look to him and draw closer to him. That's the rhythm over and over and over in our lives. To recognize his initiative, to recognize our need, and then choose to obediently look to him and stick with Jesus. Like we've seen in these verses, when people choose to ignore Jesus, when they choose to stay blind to our own sin and need for him, that's then when judgment will come. It's not that we have to have it all figured out and get it all right the first time, but just be in a real relationship with Jesus, right? It's dynamic. It's not just this static relationship that never changes. It's dynamic. He's a real person connecting with us as real people. And we have our struggles, we have our fallenness, we have our needs, and he keeps meeting us there over and over again and drawing us closer, giving us the opportunities to respond rather than close our eyes off to him, or rather than kind of developing a calloused heart towards him. And so if I could take this even just a little bit further, for us, as we try to put this into practice, okay, so how do I change my life because of this, right? What needs to be different in our lives because of the truth of what we're seeing here in this sixth sign of Jesus? I think there is an element that we can be a little proactive so as to, I guess to say it this way, to guard us against spiritual blindness. guarding ourselves against spiritual blindness. Like that's been a problem for God's people ever since the beginning, right? Like if you know some of the Old Testament story and the prophets that kept calling back to the nation of Israel, they're saying, hey, you're blind. You don't see what's going on. And so it's so easy for us, even today, to kind of give in to spiritual blindness. So just 3 brief encouragements for us to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. How do we do this? All right, the first thing you can see there is to remember where you started. Remember where you started. We don't need to dwell on our past. We don't need to just like relive it day in, day out, like, oh, what a terrible person I am. But we should remember it, right? We should remember it. Just like we see with this man, he said, I once was blind. He knew where he came from. He knew the condition that he lived in. I once was blind. It keeps us humble to remember where we started. It keeps us humble to remember how far we once were from Jesus. Because we were the sinners, right? Like we were the ones who were distanced from him. We were the ones who were lost in darkness. And so how I've heard this described by other people sometimes is that when you're driving a car, your rear view mirror is important. But none of us are actually going to drive a car by staring at your rear view mirror. That's not safe, if in case that's your regular practice. You shouldn't do that, right? But your rear view mirror is there, so every once in a while you take a little glance up. What are you doing? You're remembering what's behind you, right? You're glancing back to where you've been already. But the way to keep on driving is stare through the windshield. Like we have to keep looking forward, but the past is helpful for us. We don't dwell on it. We don't get fixated on it. Like we're going to get in an accident if that's the case. But instead we glance at that to say, that's right, I know where Jesus saved me from. I once was blind. I remember who I used to be. I'm not going to dwell on that and just throw this pity party for myself, but I remember where I came from, right? Remember where you started as this way to guard yourself, guard your heart against that spiritual blindness. Second encouragement for us is this, to celebrate growth when you see it. Celebrate growth when you see it. I know that it can be easy sometimes for us to like beat up ourselves when it seems like we're not growing fast enough. Or, man, I wish I was just more mature. I wish I was further along in this journey, in this relationship with Jesus. But the second half of that, I once was blind, is, but now I see. Now I see. Like right now, how have you seen God working in your life? If we're going to celebrate growth when you see it, even if there's small little victories in our lives, like that's good for our hearts to keep looking to Jesus, to keep celebrating the work that he's doing in us, to keep guarding against this spiritual blindness. So how have you seen Jesus in your own life? How do you see him working in your own heart? How do you see him working in your family or in relationships around you, or maybe ministries that you're connected in here in the church? How are you seeing Jesus at work right now? We need to celebrate those things. Like, don't just take those things for granted. Don't just say like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, there's bigger stuff that can be done. No, celebrate even the smallest things right now. Like, what kind of changes have you noticed in your own relationship with Jesus that are helping you become more like Jesus, that are molding you and shaping you to be someone who's more in the image of Christ? And are you celebrating that? Again, maybe it's much slower than you would like, but give Jesus the credit for the power to transform your life. Celebrate the stuff that he's already doing, the way that it's changing your heart, your emotions, your mind, maybe the things that you're focused on and thinking about. Maybe it's the words coming out of your mouth and you're like, oh yeah, I used to talk like that, or I used to tear people down, and now like there has been this change in my life. That's good. That's worth celebrating. And so where is Jesus working in your life even today? Lean into that. It's going to help guard against that blindness, okay? So we remember where we have been from, where we celebrate what God's doing now. Third encouragement is to obey with the next right thing, right? So we're kind of going like past, present, future. Obey with the next right thing. Because sometimes we want this huge faith in Jesus all at once, right? Like we want to just like, oh, I just want to have that clarity in my life. I want to have that vision in my life. But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Like all we can see is that next right thing to do as we follow Jesus. And so as he reveals something to us, as he makes something clear to us, are we taking that initial step of obedience? And if we take that step of obedience, then we trust he's going to show us the next step after that, and we'll keep taking just baby step after baby step after baby step, and it's going to have this growth and this progress and this development in our relationship with Jesus, because he's the one who comes to us, right? He's the one who is leading us into this greater clarity of him, this greater vision of him. Again, this dynamic relationship. It's not all up to us, and he's just sitting on this throne somewhere saying come on, work your way up here already. No, he just is such a good and merciful and compassionate Savior that he keeps coming down to us and saying, let me show you who I am. Let me show you how you need to grow. Let me encourage you to take this step of obedience. And so what's that next right thing in our lives? Again, I think about the second encounter that this man had with Jesus, kind of at those end verses that he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And you get a sense of the man's heart. That he's like, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? He didn't have the clarity of who Jesus was, but he had this hunger and he had this desire that he wanted to live in faith. He wanted to be obedient to Jesus. He wanted to be wherever the Son of Man was. And then once Jesus said, I'm him, right? Once he had that clarity, he revealed himself. He's like, all right, I believe. He took that next right step so that he could move closer to Jesus. He demonstrated that faith in his life. So listen, if I know anything about my heart that might also be true of all of our hearts, it's that it can become too easy to become arrogant in our faith, to think, oh, I'm fine. I made this commitment to Jesus all these years ago, or I know these big miracles that he's done in my life, so I'm just on cruise control now. It can be really easy for us to just kind of go through the motions day in and day out, and we miss where Jesus is actually coming to us and calling us to see him more clearly. And so we want these soft hearts, and we want these eyes wide open to really see him and where he's leading us, so that we look to him and stick with Jesus. So let me pray for us. Lord, I know right now, every single one of us, you're doing something in our lives. For every one of us, you're revealing something where you want us to grow in. You're revealing something that maybe we need to confess and humble ourselves and bring it to you. But God, I'm amazed that you are this infinite and massive God who has the ability to interact with each and every one of us. And so, God, we want to be the type of people that are humble and open to your leading. We want to be the type of people that admit when we don't see the full picture, but are hungry to say, show me more. Show me that next step. I want to be where you're at. So, God, I ask that for each one of us this morning, through your word, that we would be encouraged, that we would be convicted to take that next step of our faith. And God, maybe some of us are sitting here thinking, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like. God, give us the faith even in that waiting, that faith to trust that you'll show us in your timing. And so we love you. We thank you that we get to encourage one another in this way, to speak into each other's lives, that we can see you more clearly. In your name we pray. Amen.